Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
This week on the podcast, we're shifting gears a bit. We'll start with an important update on what's happening on the ground in the Twin Cities with Operation Metro Surge. First, we'll start with the important update on recent news just announced about a partial drawdown in the state. From there, we'll dive into the 2026 caucus night, looking at turnout for both parties and break down the MNGOP gubernatorial straw poll results. Then we'll move across the aisle and get into Senator Amy Klobuchar's entry into the Minnesota governor's race, what the polls are saying, as well as her performance on caucus night. Finally, we'll explore the open U.S. Senate seat left by Senator Tina Smith, including her recent endorsement of Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan over Representative Angie Craig, and what this tells us about the Democratic Party primary dynamic. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the show. So, Michael, the last few weeks, it's been all ICE and immigration all the time. We've had a lot of news, a lot of tragedy, a lot of evolution. And this week, thankfully, we don't have any major tragedy to cover, but just wanted to do a quick update on kind of what we heard this week. Tom Homan, who is the border czar under President Trump, has been in the state, and he announced this week a partial drawdown of roughly 700 officers. So 700 officers, agents are going to be leaving the state. Thousands will remain in Minnesota deployed. You know, there's still some ongoing protests and legal battles, and certainly tensions are running high. But it appears there is some cooperation going on, and there are going to be a large number leaving the state. And one thing that we've talked a lot about body cameras, it appears that agents will now be wearing body-worn cameras in Minneapolis, which officials are saying will help increase transparency and hopefully a little bit of accountability and trust. Thoughts?
I think it's, first of all, I mean this in the most respectful way. It's good to not have an episode where we're talking about someone else being shot. I think that the body cameras make sense. It's something that we've talked about. It doesn't make a ton of sense that I have a body camera and ICE agents don't. So that's good. The one thing that is concerning to me, and we can talk about this on future episodes, is we're getting these zones in Minneapolis where people are just blocking off traffic and they're commandeering sections of the street. It's giving this kind of Escape from New York feel where they're just blocking off traffic and people are having to show IDs and stuff to get through. I think that's going to be a problem. But overall, it appears that the tension level has gone down.
I absolutely agree. It has been a little weight feels like it's lifted. It doesn't feel as dark, as dreary, as depressing, to be perfectly frank, as it has the last couple of weeks. Not to say there's not still a lot going on, a lot of disagreements from left, right, and center, but it does feel like a significant shift, and I think the right direction to be heading all above the board.
I would agree.
Shifting a little bit, now we're going to kind of chat about the election year. We're now in February. The year has obviously gotten a little sidetracked by current events of what is going on in our state. And I'm really excited to kind of shift gears, shift focus, and just have a great chat about what I love the most in politics and in election years. So, I think that will be interesting to see how obviously all these issues play in the upcoming legislative cycle and the upcoming election. So we'll have further conversations about ICE and immigration and fraud and the topics that really are going to weigh on the messaging and the top lines here. But turning our attention this week, also a big week, was caucus night. It is Precinct Caucuses were held this Tuesday, February 3rd. This is really both sides grassroots process where communities come together, they vote and elect delegates, alternates to the next round of conventions. They talk about party platforms and resolutions. And then there's some straw polls. Starting first with, maybe we start first with kind of turnout for both sides. On the Republican side, with Things have changed a little bit when it comes to how caucus works for the Republican side in recent years. Both sides have reported strong engagement. I think the DFL has cited some historic turnout for an midterm caucus year with over 30,000 attendees statewide. Let's start there before we turn over to the Democrat side. Thoughts on Democrats and what they're, I saw some pictures from some of these caucus locations and they looked pretty wild for a midterm.
Yeah, no, it was a big turnout for the DFL. Early estimates cited 30,000, possibly north of 30,000. Depending on where that comes down, that could be twice what the GOP had. That's, if you're a Republican keeping score at home, 18 is smaller than 30, if my math is mathing the way it should be. And as I always say, I was told there would be no math, but this might be a little bit more of a math-heavy episode. I think the Republicans, the Democrats had in comparison. Wait, we're talking about the Democrats, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll clip that out. So the Democrats had a lot of turnout and enthusiasm. And so what I think has happened in the last 45 days, Becky, is we talked a lot about at the end of 2025, how fraud was a big issue and how that had Republicans kind of energized to talk about in the election cycle. There was a lot of enthusiasm. We've seen all these candidates running for governor and for statewide office, the open U.S. Senate seat, which we'll talk about more, and the governor's race. The truth of the matter is that the Democrats have, in the last 45 days, had some events which have very much energized and mobilized their side. We've seen a number of protest rallies that have had extraordinary turnout on their side, and then Precinct Caucus night with what is being reported as historic turnout. And they have fewer candidates running. And so right now, I would say that the enthusiasm gap is vast, and the Democrats have much more enthusiasm right now than Republicans do in this state.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think, we often see historically with midterm elections that, the party in power has a tougher time. And I think any caucus or convention or election, primary or general, really is reflective of kind of the blip in time that it is held. And that's certainly, I think, the case here when we look at the caucus and like you mentioned, the issues that have energized the left certainly are there. It's kind of wild to me of how our conversation has shifted over the last 4 or 5 weeks of what it's looking like when we turn to an election year. And that certainly could flip-flop 5 different times, 20 different times between now and November. But when we look at this and the turnout, it certainly seems the left and DFL were issue-based folks coming out, reaction to Trump, reaction to ICE, and what is going on here on the ground, as well as what they're seeing around the nation. And it certainly seems as though on the right, it was more candidate-based. We know there's a straw poll, and to shift our attention over that way, we have a plethora of candidates in the Minnesota governor's race, maybe somewhere along 12, 15, I don't know exact count, but there's a straw poll. Straw poll has traditionally been done. Doesn't always predict who wins, doesn't always indicate who is going to come out with the endorsement, but it certainly does lay the groundwork of who is organizing, who's doing the work, who's communicating with delegates. Folks, to be delegates at the state convention in May, where the endorsement of Minnesota Republican candidate for governor is going to happen, you have to start at caucus. And so this groundwork has been going on for the last month, 3 months, however long some of these candidates have been in the race. And Speaker Lisa Demuth really came out on top with strong numbers. She had just shy of 32% of the vote. In second place, we have Kendall Qualls, who was just above 25%. In third, we have Mike Lindell with 17.5%. And then in fourth place, dropping down to 6.5%, is Scott Jensen. Fifth place winner is undecided with just shy of 6%. And then we have, the rest of the candidates underneath 5%, underneath undecided. So really, we're kind of looking at those 3-4 folks at the top of who got the strongest straw poll results. We've chatted a little bit about these candidates and what we think and how they're doing. And we had the December State Central straw poll, which had these same three individuals at the top then as well. What are your thoughts? Are you surprised Damith was in first? Are you surprised with how decisively she was in first? And thoughts down the line?
I got a few points to make. Number one, I want to give a shout out and my compliments to the Republican Party of Minnesota. They did something unique this year, which is first of all, it's statutorily required in precinct caucuses when there's a governor election that the major political parties conduct a straw ballot or a preference ballot. Republican Party did that, but they did some live reporting on their website. And my compliments to Jill Voyevich-Lobs for her work and other party staff in kind of pulling that together, because it was fun to kind of watch that over the last few days, that tally come in. And that was pretty unique, and it was fun to do that. I'm sure the party got a lot of traffic. So they made some kind of intensity and made a little bit of enthusiasm out of the horse race that was going on about that straw ballot. So that was fun to do. Tip of the cap to them for a great job in pulling off that kind of technical component and also kind of the PR component of that. What I would say about the results is, I think it is a two-person race between Damith and Qualls. The one thing I will note is Damith did win. She's only got 31%. And I think it'd be fair to say, and always push back if you think I'm wrong, but there's two kind of margins in politics when it gets to these, maybe three margins, which is 40%, which is enough to block an endorsement, even though conventions endorse. But there's that 40% is kind of a mathematical and kind of a mental kind of point. 50% is kind of psychological. It got more than 50. And then obviously 60% is what's needed to get endorsed. And so my take is that I think it's significant that, it's really a two-person race. Now, Lindell at 17%, he can play troublemaker. He can play a little bit of a troublemaker, and he's already started to do that. His campaign staff is obviously large amount of election deniers, and they've already started to throw some sand into the gears of the straw ballot results that have already gone on. But I truly think this is a two-person race between Damith and Qualls, and I think some tough analysis that I'll give. Again, I'm not connected, supporting, or involved in any campaign, but I think anyone below undecided should end their campaign. There's too many candidates in the race, and I think that's creating some dynamics. And so I think there's a lot of fluidity that comes down. I think the opportunity for Qualls is he hasn't picked his running mate, and I think Damith really kind of set the market by picking Ryan Wilson as a running mate. And so if Qualls can pull out a quality running mate, I think there could be a race coming into the state convention. But ultimately, where my analysis ends is I think the numbers show it's a two-person race. And as you noted, historically, who wins on caucus night, the straw ballot, there's not a strong historical context that the person who finishes in first always gets nominated. Although I don't know that there's been a case where someone who's fallen really far back has come through. The only exception I'll make is in 2010, R.T. Rybeck won the preference ballot for the DFL. Mark Dayton's name did not appear on the preference ballots, and he eventually was nominated and became governor. And so there's always a little bit of caveat with history. But to recap for the, I think, third time, two-person race, Damith and Qualls. Lindell, I think, plays troublemaker. Your take?
I think it's a pretty good take. I have said time and time again how I, one, think we need to do away with the endorsement process, but two, love the endorsement process. And so, if we're looking at this at the lens right now, as the endorsement is going on, historically, the endorsed candidate is the Republican candidate who comes out successful in the primary. And so this is a very interesting year, because if we do continue to have a wide selection of candidates going for the endorsement, there is a likelihood of no endorsement. We have some folks who have said that they will go to a primary and not abide by the endorsement. And if we have troublemakers like a Lindell, I think your point of blocking an endorsement is very possible. Delegates like to endorse. There is certainly a possibility. It really depends on who shows up. I think that with Dameth coming out and with Dameth in first and Qualls in second and Lindell ranking down in the third, I like to give some props to the folks who showed up that might not be that just sole MAGA lane Republican. I think that is, maybe they've heard reports of some new people showing up that, Dameth really got her folks to show up, did work within those existing delegates who do get elected time and time again. And now they, go on to the next level. They go to the BPOU. They have to be elected there. There's a whole process. And I think Dameth has really showed that she has the team and the infrastructure behind this. I think Qualls, this is his second time around with this. He saw a lot of success at the 2022 MNGOP convention, almost ran away with it. There were some shenanigans, I would say, that maybe went on the House, on the Senate, or on the convention floor that derailed things, but he has also shown that he can have, an infrastructure in to do that. So I'm with you. I think it is between those two. I don't see Lindell bowing out anytime soon. I think he likes the news. I think he likes the headlines. I think he will continue to get those because of his name ID, who he is, his ties to Trump. And hey, I think certainly likes having the extra funds to spend on his autobiography. It looks like half of his and contributions, half of his money that he got into his governor's race, over half of that was spent purchasing his own autobiography. I think is a really interesting little component here. Of the $272,000 that he brought in, 272,000 that he spent, 187 of that, so just only majority of what was spent were spent on his book, which is titled "What Are the Odds from Crack Addict to CEO?" So I don't see him getting out anytime soon. I think he likes kind of being in this little zone. It will be interesting to me for the Jensens, the Robbins, the other folks that are in there that ranked lower, if they stay in and if they push on. And if they stay on to the convention, beyond the convention, because like I said, I think the more people in the race, if they get some diehards in there that are elected delegates, it could be some funky business. But last, I do want to join you in commending the MNGOP. I have been at the BPOU chair level reporting those results to the party. I have been at the party during a caucus year. It's a lot of moving pieces and levers, and to get those results in, especially from some of these places where, you have hundreds, thousands of caucus sites and locations, and gathering all of that up and doing it in real time is certainly impressive and was absolutely fun to watch.
I would agree. One, kind of maybe a little bit of devil's advocate on something. It's really tough for there not to be an endorsement. And as much as people talk about blocking an endorsement, the rules are written in such a way, as you correctly noted, conventions like to endorse. Rules are written in a way to really force an endorsement. And so the conventions in Duluth, people are traveling a long way to get there. And I think it's very likely that there'll be an endorsed candidate. And if history is any indicator, it will be one of the top two, if likely, that will get endorsed. But just a little context and minor devil's advocate there on my part.
I love the devil's advocate for this, so thank you for chiming in. Continuing our conversation about the governor's race, we have a big change up. Senator Amy Klobuchar has officially launched her campaign for governor. When Walz exited the race, it was largely an understanding that was what was going to happen. We know that some of that was a little bit derailed with what's been going on, but she is in her launch video. She tied her bid to some of this ongoing tension, including her work at the federal government, and saying that, the state must stand up for what's right and fix what's wrong. I think it's going to be really interesting. Before we get into really her campaign and everything fully, I want to chat briefly about continuing that conversation about caucus night and the preference poll. The Democrats also did a preference poll for this race. Took a little bit to get the results, and there's been some conversations online about the validity of those results. So those results did come out. The DFL put out something, I believe, on Wednesday this week, saying that with 84% reporting, Klobuchar got 79% of the votes, uncommitted had 16%, write-ins got 3%, and Christopher Seymour got 1%. Prior to those results being released. I want to hear what you were seeing and hearing. But what I was seeing and hearing on Twitter and from some conversations was that in a lot of places, uncommitted largely ranked over Klobuchar. That in more places, more people selected uncommitted than wrote in Klobuchar's name. Did you hear the same? What are your thoughts of what you are hearing?
Really none of your damn business what I was seeing in here. I'm just joking. I just wanted to say that. Yeah, I mean, I thought that there a couple of things. I think some people were surprised. So the straw ballot is required for governor. It's in state statutes. That's a law. You have to do it. I think there was that surprised some people. There's not one for the Senate race, but there is for governor. So political parties have to do it on precinct caucus night. I did see a lot of uncommitted traffic on social media. A part of me wonders is if they were just louder and the people that were showing up were just more boisterous about it. I don't know. There's a reporting mechanism where these results go over to the Secretary of State's office. So the Secretary of State's office, again, doesn't oversee the elections, but they're reported to them. And so to some degree, I think there'll be some kind of balancing of the ledger to make sure that they're all there. But it's clear that there's a percentage of people inside the DFL who are supportive of there being or uncommitted at this point, who kind of want there to be a contest. And it goes back to a question that Becky, you and I discussed, which is what happened in 2024 with Kamala Harris getting in the race is the way in which Klobuchar is getting in this race. Do Democrats kind of want a contest? Do they want a bit of a fight? Do they want people to go out and have to earn their votes? And I think if it was on the Republican side, I guarantee they'd want that. They wouldn't want just some one candidate to get in and have it be over with. Because I don't think, as much as people are in a tent as in a political party, I don't think they always necessarily vote as a block. I mean, obviously, look what happened on caucus night here. The varying degrees in which people, I think, not only vote, but vote poorly based on who can win and who can't win. And so I think we always wanting to be fair, accurate, not necessarily balanced, because facts sometimes aren't balanced. They are one-sided. I think it's fair to say that there is a percentage, and some can argue on the significance of that percentage, but I would say there's a percentage of voters inside the inside the DFL party who are looking for there to be a race and potentially some form of alternative to Senator Klobuchar. Fair?
Very fair. I think, I've been seeing some bubblings up of a draft Erin May Quaid campaign. I think she has come out and said she's not a part of it. She's not interested. Obviously, always flattering, though. I would, we talked a little bit before about, I think that there's still time and energy, that there might be a DSA candidate that gets in to make some messaging moves, take a stance there. And I think that in addition to maybe just not wanting somebody that's super anointed, appointed and just kind of set in this position to be the candidate, to be the nominee, I think at this point, with everything that's going on, people are really upset, people are really angry, people are really passionate. And while a very well-respected, highest vote-getting Democrat in the state, Klobuchar just doesn't scream fighter, right? I mean, she's kind of really staked out being a pragmatic, thoughtful, this is me putting on my Democrat hat. This is not how I personally feel, but this is, no, I'm putting on my Democrat hat. I'm giving her props right now. People
you have
look
a Democrat
at her,
hat?
I don't own one. I'm borrowing, from others. But, people look at her as being thoughtful, pragmatic, and not super fiery on the left, veering to that left wing. She often sits on that fence and finds a way to really not ruffle much for feathers and stuff. So if I'm a Democrat, if I'm somebody who's, protesting in the streets and really frustrated and really angry and want somebody to go fight for me, something that we've been hearing on the Republican side, wanting that fighter candidate, Klobuchar just doesn't scream me for that. I think she can play the role. I think she can fit the bill enough. But it wouldn't surprise me if they wanted somebody a little bit more like a Aaron May Quaid who would come out and give those fiery speeches and be passionate and be a little bit more off the cuff. I don't think it's going to happen. I think everybody will fall in line. I think that, right now she's still really new. She's only been in the race for a week or two here, but I just expect that they'll all fall in line eventually.
Yes. I want to give a comment about Klobuchar's release video, if I may.
Sure.
I am stunned that Republicans did not respond more aggressively to her announcement. Senator Klobuchar released a video. That's all she did. She announced via video. And as putting on borrowing your partisan Republican hat, because I think mine's been taken away, borrowing yours for a bit, I am stunned by how Republicans responded to Klobuchar getting in the race. There wasn't one press conference. There wasn't one media availability. There wasn't one aggressive bracketing or messaging response to Klobuchar's announcement that she was actually running. I was stunned by that. Politics is not a tickle competition. This is exactly how Klobuchar has an aura about her. She is respectfully an 800-pound gorilla. And I know there's a narrative out there that Republicans out there, a lot of these people are saying is that she's never had a real opponent. 2006, I worked on a campaign against Klobuchar, and I worked on Mark Kennedy's race. He was a congressman at the time, sitting congressman. We outraised Klobuchar's campaign. That is the definition of a serious challenger, and she blew us out of the water. I think that Republicans have to realize that at some point they are going to have to engage Klobuchar, and letting her announce on video and not responding. There was not one Republican in this state who had a press conference, who did a press conference on Zoom, stood in front of the cameras and bracketed and messaged against Klobuchar. I think it was an absolute, from a process standpoint, wearing my partisan hat, that was shocking to me. And I don't think Republicans are going to, I don't know what it was. I don't know if they're afraid of Klobuchar. I don't know what it is, but you got to be able to stand at a press conference when you're running against someone, even when it's an 800-pound gorilla, and I'm meaning that respectfully. I don't know why I always add that qualifier when I'm talking about.
You're not calling anybody fat.
I know, I'm just saying it. She's as Blois Olson has said, she's a juggernaut.
Absolutely.
And I can't just steal his terms, but she's the 800-pound gorilla, so she's strong. You got to stand at a press, and the fact that she had that announcement, I was just flabbergasted that no one did anything substantively to message against her. And when there's all these Republican candidates that are running, you think one of them would have had the spine or backbone to stand up to Klobuchar and have a press conference and respond to her. And so it's one observation I would make, putting on my partisan hat briefly.
I will join you with that because I think there's two things that I think Republican candidates could have done to really start this off with some big dings. One, calling her out. And
what did you say?
Big dings to her campaign.
Thank you.
Big dings to her campaign. Thank you for that clarification opportunity. One, calling her out for doing a video. There's so much going on.
I did not mean to be inappropriate, and I'm sorry.
It was really funny.
Okay, I can cut that. I was not trying to be inappropriate.
I thought it was funny.
Okay,
no issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've never been inappropriate in a recording. I'm not Todd, so please, I just really had to ask. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it was great.
Okay.
Yeah, it was great. I'll make my other comment when we're not recording. But two things that I think could have been done to really start to throw a little mud at Senator Klobuchar and her campaign. One, calling her out on doing a video and not doing, her speech in the snow and her press conferences and all of that. There is so much going on right now that to announce that less than a year out, you're running for governor and not giving an opportunity to do any press questions or get any statements out there on some of the big things that have been facing the state, I think is just like a little weak. I would ding her as saying, like, are you scared? Do you not have your policy positions ready? Like, why are you nervous to do a press conference to ask or answer questions to the press and start calling her out on that. It's one of my favorite things that, I like to do when I was working on campaigns, is encouraging the press to really press your opponent on things. And this is one that I certainly think that she's in the race. She needs to already start standing up on fraud, on ICE and immigration, what's going on in our state, and staking her positions out. And she cannot sit on the fence anymore. But that is going to be necessary for candidates to force her feet to the fire on that. Secondly, what Republicans, in my eyes, one significant thing that they need to do to be successful here is tie her to Governor Walz. We know that Governor Walz was really vulnerable if he continued to run, and that was kind of where Republicans thought their best shot was. I think that Republicans really need to do everything in their power to say Klobuchar is just part of Walz. This is going to be the same old. It's going to continue on. And the fact that we had 3 weeks since Walz dropped out and Klobuchar launched, 3 weeks knowing that she was the chosen one who is going to get in. The fact that they didn't have, in my eyes, if I was on a campaign, I would have gone. So she was elected to the Senate in 2000 and started in 2007. Tim Walz was elected to Congress and started in 2007. These two have been walking hand in hand for 18 years.
A good messaging point.
Thank you. And to not have just a video with pictures of them with all of the nice things that they've said about each other, that she has said about him when he was first running for governor, when he was running for a second campaign, when he announced he was running for, the quotes, and having that overlaid with all of these pictures and basically saying, you think that this is going to be any different? She thought that Governor Walz was doing a great job. She thought that everything was going, above board and kosher. She is just as complicit as he is. Again, is that true? Yet to be determined. We'll see how it goes, but that there wasn't anything starting that tie of those two Democrats together in this position and in this race for governor is a little disappointing.
I would like to just note that the other thing I know you're really good at on campaigns is throwing old ladies out of campaign events when they're starting to fight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it.
You're very good at that.
So let's now kind of chat about polls, right? So KSTP came out. KSTP Survey USA did a poll conducted January 27th to the 30th, 575 registered voters, and put Klobuchar up against each of the main Republican candidates, or all of the Republican candidates, and it was pretty tough. So Scott Jensen is rightfully touting his being the closest race. It has Jensen at 35 and Klobuchar at 49, so down by 14. Next up, we have Dameth, who is 34 to Klobuchar's 49, so 15 points down. Qualls to Klobuchar is 16 points away. Lindell is where Klobuchar sees the biggest lead with 20 points. And all of the others kind of sit in there at 16, 17 points back from Klobuchar. Did you expect a 15-point race in the polls this early on?
I was speaking to someone just before the results came out, and I won't disclose who, but a mutual friend of ours, and I did not think it was going to be that much, but it was big. And so a couple points I'd like to make. We had discussed this earlier, and I had made the point on the podcast of saying, I need someone to explain to me, someone who has a political IQ above 10, to explain to me how Tim Walz getting out of the race was better for Republicans than Klobuchar. And the poll results show by every available indicator that Klobuchar is in a much stronger position. And I wrote a little bit on my Substack about this, which is, I think what the race showed is again, and always push back, Becky, if you think I'm wrong. I don't know why I always say that. I just always want to make sure I'm inviting for you to tell me that I'm wrong. And
I never miss a chance if I want to.
You've never needed permission to tell me that I'm wrong, but it is your show too. Walz, one of the things that people have consistently tried to spin is that Walz was going to lose re-election. Do I think it would have been a closer race? Yes. Was it a volatile race? Yes, it was a more volatile race. But I don't think there was any poll that showed that Walz was going to lose the race. And I've seen private polling and public polling that have shown that. So it was a closer race. I think what Klobuchar does is she stabilizes the race, and she raised the floor and the ceiling for what Democrats could potentially do. This is what I would describe pretty much close to an extinction level event for Republicans. If Klobuchar wins by anywhere close to these margins, you're talking about a DFL trifecta. And that is a real world scenario now. And I kind of broke that down in my Substack about just how the intensity and how it stabilized the race, which I think is going to be very interesting. Again, these are pretty comfortable margins. And the other point I'd make is we've seen these margins before, because you know who had them? Rice White. These are very similar to some of the polls that came out about Rice White when he was running against Klobuchar the last time. And so what Republicans need to realize is that Klobuchar is unique entity in and of itself. She is very much has a brand like Dayton had, a brand like Mondale, a brand like Humphrey. She has a brand. And again, I'll go back to that data point. 2006 was a tough year for Republicans. We barely won the governor's race here in Minnesota. Tim Pawlenty, just a fantastic candidate, along with a great effort by the state party to help get him across the finish line. But Mark Kennedy's campaign, which I worked on, outraised Klobuchar. That is the definition of a real opponent. And she blew us out of the water. There is just something about Klobuchar that she has, as folks would say, and I think I've used this phrase before about Trump, the cake is baked, meaning it's already been, the cake is baked for her, but it's a good cake. It's the kind of cake you'd want to eat versus the bad cakes of Trump about Trump. You know what I mean by that statement?
Absolutely.
It's baked in a good way. And so she's going to be the 800-pound gorilla, or to Blois Olson's juggernaut, and Republicans got to compete. That's why, Becky, when if we're putting on our partisan hats for just a few moments here, that's why it's important that when she announces Republicans are engaging in doing things to push back, and they're not just sitting back, because this is going to be a real street fight, and it's going to get out of control really quick if Republicans don't start taking the race seriously.
Yeah, I think that, if they're going to have any success, they need to start messaging hard, and they need to work on, unlike a lot of races where you want to define your opponent before they get the opportunity to define themselves. She's, like you said, the cake is baked. She's defined. People know her. And while I think that there's some, maybe a lack of enthusiasm with some people on the left, the middle knows her, and the middle believe that she is a competent adult in the room who looks at things objectively and votes. She's not too crazy left wing, but she's not, she stands against her party at times when she needs to. I think it's a place where, while you can't necessarily define her, there are aspects of her that I think could be vulnerabilities to take advantage of. And I think you need to start. I mean, we're 10 months, 9 months out from the election. The time is like yesterday that you need to get this work done. So if you want to continue to say that to prevent fraud from happening again, to change things and get our state's checkbook under control, and to get the state back in a fiscally great place, a accountable state with good oversight, that any Democrat, including Amy Klobuchar, is not the answer. You need to start singing that from the mountaintops. You need to have press conferences. You need to do op-eds. You need to do a press tour around the state, and every time include the fact that Amy Klobuchar is besties with Tim Walz. And so it needs to happen if there's going to be any chance of doing that, because, yeah, she is tough, and it's going to continue to be tough running against her with her war chest, with Walz potentially transferring $3 million to the DFL, with the lack of MNGOP apparatus. Even though we're seeing some positive, good movement from them, the funding just isn't there. That decades long infrastructure just isn't there. I want to be optimistic that we can do this and move this way. And like I said, who knows what's going to be the top issue that's going on in 10 months from now. But with Klobuchar, she's been kind of even keeled over the past 15, 18 years, and it is going to be tough.
It is.
So big statewide campaigns with governor, big statewide campaign for U.S. Senate. So shifting our attention there, it is might be my favorite place to watch right now. I feel like it's going to get pretty spicy pretty fast. So Senator Tina Smith is retiring. We have Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who is running, and we have 2nd District Congressional or Congresswoman Angie Craig, who is running. Smith had originally said she was going to be staying out of it, not endorsing, but earlier this week we saw Senator Smith endorse Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. One, did you expect that endorsement was coming, that it was coming for Flanagan, and that it would be coming this early?
I was surprised. She had made it pretty clear she was not going to be anointing her successor. And don't have a PhD in politics, but I think endorsing your successor is anointing your successor. And so endorsing a candidate can lead to that. So Senator Smith did endorse Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, and I was a bit surprised by it, but it is what it is. I think it had a little bit to do with the timing of it. I think a little bit had to do with Flanagan's, the release of some campaign finance reports, which show that she is burning through cash like fraudsters in Minnesota. And so she's really burning through some cash. And so in comparison to what Congresswoman Craig has, but that's my take. Yours?
Yeah, I agree. I've heard some folks talk about the kind of Wellstone family and folks who come from that world. And I think that's where we have a little cohesion between Smith and Flanagan, kind of both came up through Camp Wellstone and that whole world. And so there was already some allegiance there. So it just, I would say, maybe surprised me that it came this early. But I mean, to your point about campaign finance and ahead of caucus where people are getting together and going to be having those conversations, it seemed to make sense, that timing. I really see this race.
It seemed to make sense based on timing of caucuses. And so you think the timing
to bring money in and to get people at that caucus to maybe, if they were not considering Flanagan, to maybe put a little extra weight when they're having those conversations, like, wow, that really, is impressive that she got the Smith endorsement.
Good point.
I think it's going to be interesting here to see how this becomes potentially ICE and immigration versus fraud. We saw there was a public policy polling, internal poll that came out from Flanagan that has Flanagan at 40 and Craig at 28 with 31% undecided. So it has Flanagan up 12 with DFL voters. And some of this really is pointed to some of the messaging that I feel like we'll be seeing a little bit more come out from the Flanagan campaign, where I feel like the spiciness is going to come. When respondents heard more about Angie Craig's voting record around ICE-related issues last year, Flanagan's lead grows. So they talked about how Angie Craig supported the Lake and Riley Act, a bill that allows for the deportation and detention of undocumented immigrants suspected on nonviolent crime. It makes 35% of respondents said it makes them much less likely to vote for her. And then when asked about a resolution that it was expressed gratitude to ICE that Angie Craig voted for, 71% said it made them less likely to vote for her, including 47% of respondents that say much less likely. I think that after those messaging points, Flanagan's lead in this, again, internal Flanagan campaign poll jumps to 32%. I think it's a little viewpoint into what I expect to see come out of the Flanagan if they're really ready to sling that mud. And on the flip side, I would expect that we would see Craig's campaign coming out and tying Flanagan to walls and fraud. If you want to bring that cycle back around and if you want to go that route, I feel like that's where you got to ding her a little bit. She's kind of come unscathed, but we, have talked about how I believe that she is complicit in a lot of that, being the lieutenant governor under walls here. So I am excited to see debates and see it get a little bit more spicy here. I think that we're getting into it, and bring it on.
I think spicy is the word of this episode. Spicy and dings is the word of this episode. My take is, first of all, want to be consistent, but I want to get obviously your take on this too. A lot of people poo-poo internal campaign polls. I don't, because you still have to put a pollster's name on them with a little bit of grain of salt. Your take?
I mean, I think, yeah, you take it with a grain of salt for the overall results, but I love a messaging insight into some of what are the things, because in my experience working on campaigns, you put out 5-10 messages and find the 2 or 3 that stick, and those are your ads and those are your mailers, and that's what you're using every time you write a press release. And so if these are the ones they put out in their memo, I feel like we're going to be seeing these again.
So to our listeners who are watching this or listening, you don't roll your eyes necessarily at a internal poll from a campaign.
No.
Yeah.
Do I think it's a 12-point race between Flanagan and Craig? No. But no, I don't roll my eyes at all. Because you like you see, PPP polling or PPP is not a crazy out of the water, I think they're reputable. I think that we look at this and can certainly have some takeaways from it.
Yeah. The other point I would make is that I spoke to a couple Democrats who I would consider them to be more moderate, more mainstream not super progressive. They thought that Craig's votes, particularly on the Lake and Riley Act, was, in the grand scheme of things, not a bad general election vote. But the ICE appreciation vote could be problematic in light of what's gone on. I just, piggybacking on a previous topic we did, I would watch for a number of resolutions to be introduced, and I think there were some resolutions introduced at Precinct Caucuses. On the DFL side, most likely anti-ICE, and on the Republican side, pro-ICE, that could bubble their way up to the state convention and get more publicity this year that may cause some of the statewide candidates to be a bit squeamish. This is where some party platform stuff is. That's really in the weeds. We're getting into party resolutions, but as we're discussing votes, that's one way in which these other issues kind of come up. And so I could see some of that playing out. If you're thinking about that kind of spiciness, Becky, and that kind of proxy battle that goes on between the campaigns, introducing resolutions is a way in which, because Flanagan is a executive, she's the lieutenant governor, and Craig is a member of Congress. One way in which to pit them against each other on equal terms is for congressional districts and these local party units to have resolutions where they ask the candidates to support them or not. And so that could be a voting opportunity, support opportunity that could really create, as you would say, some spiciness between these campaigns. So it's going to be very fascinating to see. I am very interested how this race turns out, because I think it has a number of this race probably has, I'm just racking my brain, the small space I have. I think it has the potential to really, who the Democrats pick has a real ability to impact the Republicans' chances of picking up the seat, which are still very small, but it could really impact it.
Yeah, I love a good in the weeds conversation when it comes to resolutions and party platforms. I mean, these are something that have to be introduced at caucus, and then that usually have to be moved forward at the next level BPOU or OU conventions or county conventions, and come out from usually 5 to 10 different areas, different like 2 or 3 congressional districts to move forward. I mean, there's all of these different apparatuses, but I think to your point, a lot of these places are where we're going to start seeing some of these debates and some of these, forums or panels where we have Craig and Flanagan sitting, side by side. And so those questions are going to be asked. And so I think that this is Flanagan kind of, showing where she stands and where she could see this going. And while I think some of this certainly plays well in the general election, you obviously have to get past the primary to get to that general election. And I think that's going to be an interesting place of where we see things stand. I think also when we contrast that with a Klobuchar, like Flanagan and Klobuchar are very different kind of candidates, where Craig and Klobuchar I feel like are a little bit more similar. So it will be, I think, just an interesting dynamic of how the Democrats navigate all of that, potentially hitting and throwing mud on Craig's campaign without doing, collateral damage to Klobuchar. There's just a whole lot going on there. And man, am I excited that we're talking politics again.
Yep.
So I do have also some numbers from a Craig internal poll conducted over the summer. But before we get there, we have to talk about another thing that we barely got to talk about, which is Republican candidate for the Senate race that recently got in. We have Michelle Tafoya, former sideline reporter for the NFL. She got in the race, launched just on January 21st, and has significant name ID. I think there are a lot of Republicans that believe that she has, the fundraising prowess. She's been messaging on this for a good number of years. I will say back in 2014 is when she kind of really was dipping her toes a little bit more into the political world. She hosted Mike McFadden's hospitality suite at the MNGOP convention. I remember some hoops having to jump through to get that because, again, people who are hired by different broadcasting associations, they have different things that they have to do to get permission to do some of this. But she, over the last, what is that now, since 11 years, has really been doing more Republican messaging, been out there, been a fighter, on Twitter and the like. And so she is officially in the race. There was so with this, ahead of her jumping in the race, obviously the Craig team thought or knew that she was going to be getting in. They did a poll that was conducted July 8th through the 11th, so quite a while ago. And it shows, and this was trying to show her difference between Craig and Flanagan over Tafoya. This shows, again, take it for what it's worth, 6 months ago. Craig over Tafoya, 49 to 45%, Flanagan, 48 to 45%. But where I think some of this is telling for the Craig campaign is that Craig had a 12-point advantage over persuadable voters and flipped that to 46 to 34 after some messaging where Flanagan was tied, 42-42. And then again in a split test with negative messaging about Craig versus negative about Flanagan, Craig still comes out on top where Flanagan was more vulnerable. Those messaging in that one was questionable whether that was actually negative messaging about Craig, but to each their own. And then it says especially damaging to Flanagan it was among independents where she loses to Tafoya by 17 points after those negative messaging. So again, this is grain of salt, take it for what it's worth. Craig's campaign obviously wanted to show that when we're looking at general, so Flanagan's a little bit more primary, this is more general election. She wanted to show that if you go with Flanagan, you might lose against Tafoya.
Yes. And here's just we should probably, it's our show, we want to make sure we're being fair to our listeners, spend a little bit more time talking about Tafoya, about her entrance. I keep saying this to people about Tafoya, she's pro-choice. Republicans haven't knowingly endorsed a pro-choice candidate since Judy Dutcher, and they did so because they didn't ask her if she was pro-choice. I do not see her getting endorsed. I'm sorry, I just don't. And I'm happy. My DMs are open, and you can certainly give me your feedback. I just don't see it happening. And the other connection that I'll make, and I wish this wasn't the case, but I like to be consistent, even though silly consistency is a hobgoblin of a small mind. The party endorsement matters. It shouldn't, but it matters. And so there's really no history of, aside from a couple of quirks, aside from Governor Carlson winning in 94, the endorsed candidate generally, nearly always, 99.9% repeating, wins the primary. And so Tafoya coming in and being pro-choice, particularly about the way she messages about abortion, trying to tell people it's really not that big of a deal, I don't think that's the way. Second Amendment people don't like to be told it's not a big deal, and people who are passionately pro-life don't like to be told that their issue isn't a big deal. I remain convinced that she's going to have a very difficult time getting endorsed. And so this might be kind of a flash in the pan. I think she waited way too long to get in, but we'll see. But we should probably talk more about Tafoya at a later point, give the due diligence to our listeners as we are always try to do.
Absolutely. Just a couple more polls I want to point out is that same KSTP Survey USA poll did a question about about this U.S. Senate seat, because can't just be Klobuchar versus, we've got multiple candidates on both sides with no clear front runner. They kind of did it as a preference up and down. So they put all of them on who do you like out of all of these. And so Craig got 20%, Flanagan 19%, and Tafoya was the pick for the Republicans at 13%, well ahead of Royce White. So
Your candidate.
Right, obviously. And then the last one is that the NRSC, who
Tell our listeners what that stands for.
So that's the National Republican Senatorial Committee. These are, based out in Washington, D.C. They pick their seats around the country, the swamp that they're going to play in, that they're going to send money in, that they're going to, this is something that you really, really want. If you're going to have a chance, especially in the state of Minnesota, where we struggle with the state party side of things, to have somebody come in and spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on polling for you, on mailers for you, on ads for you, this is what you need to have any shot. And so I like that they did this poll and put it out. It is promising. I know that she was out meeting with them. I know that, at this point, if I were a betting woman, I would say she is on that kind of cusp of where they're spending some money initially and seeing how things play out before they either continue to sink in or cut and run. But they did this initial poll conducted January 31st through February 1st, likely Republican primary voters. They were asked if the 2026 Republican primary election for U.S. Senate was held today and the following candidates were on the ballot, for whom would you vote? Tafoya got 41%. Second place was Royce White with 11%. And then on down, Schwarzy, Han, Weiler, and then undecided gets 34%. So they also did a testing with those respondents who identified themselves as conservative Republicans and those identified themselves as the MAGA Republicans. And in their memo highlighted that her support remains at 41% in both of those categories. I think really trying to show that she does have some legs in the MAGA lane, as well as with kind of that general Republican base that doesn't maybe identify in that. Yeah, I mean, it's great news. I do like that we were going to have a messenger in the Senate race that is not Royce White. I do think there is some.
Well, don't get too far ahead of yourself.
True. Like to your point, I mean, if he comes out with the endorsement and then if she either cuts and runs or goes to the primary, I mean, I do believe that we're gonna see him for a while. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to just quickly clarify. I've done some work in the past for the NRSC. That swamp comment was meant in the most loving way to my overlords at the NRSC, and I wouldn't disparage them in any way. I really hope it's not Royce White. I think, we have Schwarzy, we have David Han, and we have Tafoya. Again, I think Schwarzy and Weiler are the only ones abiding by the endorsement. And so there's another candidate, Mark York, who's gotten in. I think he's abiding by the endorsement, but I don't put much stock into his candidacy. I think he got in super late. So I think I think we're on the anyone but Royce White, and then we may be some division there, because if we get, here's the absolute word nightmare scenario for Republicans, Mike Lindell and Royce White. Now, I want to not correct myself, but adjust something. I have long had the position that if Mike Lindell got in, he would be one of the front runners for the endorsement. He is in the top 3. It's still a little bit of ways away, but he is not catching on to the level at which I was concerned he was. And so if there's anything that I'm very comfortable with is correcting myself. And so I just want to note that my analysis, good informed analysis changes along the way. But the nightmare scenario again is Mike Lindell gets the gov nod, Royce White for U.S. Senate, and then you might as well just take the signs off the door. But you'll be happy.
Obviously.
Yes.
So we're 3.5 months out from the state convention, and I think we're going to see forums, we're going to see debates, we're going to see mailers, we're going to see more messaging come out. I'm very interested to see at what level the NRSC comes in and plays for Tafoya leading up to the endorsement. I'm very interested to see if and when a Trump endorsement, either in Senate or for governor, come in to play. And I could see that happening at one of those. I mean, I think if I'm in the Trump administration, and even though even though she is pro-choice, and even though she might be a little bit more moderate, he's worried about his chances, right? Of what's going to happen to the makeup of the Senate and the House out there. And so if he thinks that potentially throwing his weight behind Michelle Tafoya, if he's seeing, internals that are looking like, which obviously he gets this on all of these candidates, people are going to presenting in front of him as well. I did that when I worked on Jason Lewis. We, not in front of the president, but in front of the president's team, and why you need that support. Michelle Tafoya is going to be the best bet for him to potentially pick up a Senate seat here, which he desperately needs to pick up, because there are some that are going to be eroding away as we see some of these races like in Texas and some of these other midterm polls coming out. So I could see that coming out. I think there's probably some big conversations, some maybe groveling that's going to need to be happen. But I think would not surprise me if in the Senate race we do see an endorsement ahead of the convention in May.
We don't have time today, but I would like to, because you did mention groveling, I would like to get into a Substack post I wrote about questions that the candidates should be asked if they're seeking Trump's endorsement, because I have some concerns with that. But yes, you're true. The one thing I will point out is I am continually surprised, and we've been doing this podcast for over 3 years now. I have never said the things that other people have said about Trump. And she has said some pretty rough things about Trump. So has J.D. Vance. A lot of people did. And boy, oh boy, you got to think about what you say and what you write, because it comes back. Becky.
Hey, don't I know it?
Yes.
Well, that's all I got. It is exciting time. We are 9 months out. I mean, just like 9 months out here. And so we have the legislative session starting. Very exciting times to start talking about what that's going to look like, what the 2026 election is going to look like, and all the implications of what is going on in the ground in Minnesota and nationally is going to have on everything.
Becky, I want to thank you for doing this. I also want to once again compliment you. There is nobody in the podcast industry who does a better script and formats the show better than you. The fact you were able to pull this together with all that's gone on is simply amazing.
Well,
My compliments to you. Today is also we're recording this on a Thursday, a day or so late to allow for some analysis on Precinct Caucuses. Today is a very historic day in the history of the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. We'll have more to share about that later on, but today is a very historic day. But I want to thank you, Becky, and thank all our listeners for joining us on this episode of the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.